We've been in a series entitled Dream to Destiny, and we've been looking at the life of Joseph. And Joseph receives a dream at the age of 17, but he doesn't walk into the manifestation of the dream until the age of 30. So for 13 years, Joseph had to go through various tests in order to walk into his destiny. And God has given you a dream. However, there's certain tests that you and I must go through in order to walk into the destiny that God has for us. And today I want to talk about this one test. And this is a test that can make us uncomfortable. It doesn't matter if you follow Jesus or if you're far away from God. This is a test that you and I fail over and over again. Do you want to know what this test is? It's the purity test. It's sexual management. How do we live a life that's pleasing to God when it comes to our sexuality? How do you manage your sexuality? Here's the reality. God made you sexual. The devil didn't make you sexual. God has made you sexual. However, when we thwart God's purposes and we don't do it God's way, it becomes evil. So today, I want to talk about this purity test because Joseph passed this test with flying colors. And sexual immorality and sex outside of a covenant relationship between a man and a woman in marriage is called sin. Sexual immorality is translated porneia. That's where we get the word pornography. It talks about whoredom, fornication, and idolatry. It's actually surrendering our sexual purity. Sexual immorality is selling off sexual purity and involves all type of sexual expression outside the boundaries of a biblical marriage. Please don't tune me out today. I know this makes us uncomfortable, but the reality is this is the test that a lot of us do in secret. Man, you guys are quiet today. Okay, nobody's at the church today, but this test, purity test, Joseph passes, but the question is, will you and I pass this test? So we're going to look at the life of Joseph today. And Joseph, he's at Potiphar's house. Potiphar is a main tenant or administrator underneath Pharaoh. This means he could have his pick for any girl that he would want to have. So I just assumed that Potiphar's wife was gorgeous. She was beautiful. And Joseph is now serving at Potiphar's house. I don't know if he's doing CrossFit, P90X, T25. The text says that Joseph is handsome, he's beautiful, and he's buff. And I don't know if he was putting some furniture together at IKEA. I don't know what Joseph was doing, but one day, Potiphar's wife looks at Joseph. Look at the text, everybody, because it says this. And Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully. Come and sleep with me, she demanded. Do you notice this? It says she began to look at him lustfully. Look comes before lust. And she didn't just suggest that she or Joseph sleep with her, she demanded it. Here's my first point, everybody. This is critical. It's on the screen. Lust starts with a look. Have you ever thought about that? Lust starts with a look. It says that Potiphar's wife looked at Joseph lustfully. We'll talk about the heart, but the first thing that we need to understand is, what are we watching? What are we looking at? Because if we look at the wrong things, we will end up being lustful. Because lust starts with a look. And here's the reality as I was putting together this message, that there's so many statistics that we can look into that affect people in the church the same way as people outside of the church. Let's look at a few, because 40 million Americans regularly visit porn sites. I want you to think about that. 42 million porn sites are on the internet. Let's look at another one. 47% of families report that pornography is a problem in the home. Can I ask you a question? Is it a problem in your home? Do you check what your kids are watching? Do people know what you're watching? Let's look at another one. 68% of church-going men, I said church-going, men, and over 50% of pastors watch porn on a regular basis. 68% of men who go to church, who are tuning in right now, ladies, we'll get to you in a minute, and 50% of pastors struggle with porn. We talk about the COVID-19 pandemic, but I want to suggest to you there's a porn pandemic in the church that many people don't talk about. And as your pastor, I want to be honest, this is an area that I've never struggled with by the grace of God. I'll be honest with you. This isn't my vice. There's a whole lot of issues that I have, but this is not one of them. But I never want this to be an issue because I guard what I watch. Because I know this principle, a look comes before lust. Let's look at another one. 25% of married women say that they watch porn at least once a month. I know sometimes we think it's taboo that women don't look at porn, but the reality is 1 out of 4 women who are married are looking at porn. And lastly, we understand this point. 76% of 18 to 24-year-olds actively search for porn. Maybe you have some teenagers and young adults at your house right now. 3 out of 4 of them. And it's never been an easier time than now to watch porn. You can just look at your screen. You think your child's on the Bible app, but yet they're on a porn site. And the average child watches porn over an hour a week. Now, this is critical. And during my research, I learned that children start at the age of 11 years old is when the first time they start to watch porn. And so this is an area that we need to address. Because if you're ever going to walk into the destiny that God has for you, you have to be delivered from the purity test. And Joseph, he passes the purity test. Let's look at Matthew chapter 5. It says, you have heard the commandment that says you must not commit adultery. Maybe you're here and you're saying, man, I haven't committed adultery. I'm good. Well, I want you to notice this. Look at the next verse. It says this, but I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery in his heart. Do you notice this? It says look before the heart. And it says that if you look at a woman lustfully, you've committed adultery. In other words, it starts with the eye, goes in the heart, then starts for you to live that action out. We got to watch what we look at. Can I ask you a question? Over this pandemic, when you've been locked in the house, what have you been looking at? What have you been scrolling with? What have you been watching on TV? I know if you're like me, it's hard to sleep. My sleep pattern is off. In the midnight hour when everybody goes to sleep and you get bored, what are you currently looking at? Potiphar's wife looks at Joseph and demands something from Joseph that doesn't belong to her. And we know how Joseph responds, but the question is, how will you and I respond when it comes to the purity test? Let's look at this real quick, because David, you know King David, the one after God's own heart? I love the story because he sees Bathsheba bathing. But verse 1 says it, and it's critical because it says when kings should be at war. When kings should be at war. And David takes idle time, and instead of going to battle, he decides to stay at home. Because this is what I know, when you become idle, that's when temptation ensues. And so David should be with his soldiers, but David stays at home, and this is what he's doing. He's looking one day on his rooftop, and he sees Bathsheba taking a bath. I'm pretty sure he's already seen Bathsheba before, but this look was a little bit differently. He became lustful. And I've heard people say that lust is actually the second look. But what if the first look is a long look? And David looks at Bathsheba taking a bath, and he says, hey, fellas, who's this girl? And that's Uriah's wife. And he tells the people in his circle to go get her. Who is in your circle? Who's asking you tough questions? I got a couple pastor friends of mine, and they call me on the phone. Sometimes we're shooting the breeze. How did church go? What are you preaching about? And you know, I told one of my friends the other day, I said, you're not asking me tough questions. You're not asking me questions, because a man that doesn't have a person ask him these type of questions is a dangerous man. And David sees Bathsheba, but nobody in his crew says, David, that's not right. And now Bathsheba, she comes to the house and they do their thing and she ends up pregnant. I'm pretty sure David never thought it would go that far, because sin will take you further than you want to go. And then all of a sudden, when she's pregnant, David gets to the point where he wants to kill her husband, and he does it. It started with a look. Hear me, because you might say that'll never be you. But it starts with a look, because a look comes before lust, and then it gets in your heart, and sin will take you where you never thought that you would go. Look at Psalm real quick. It says, I will set nothing wicked before my eyes. Who wrote this? David wrote this. David wrote this after this struggle that he had, after this sin, after he's done the worst thing in his life. And he said, I will not set anything wicked before my eyes. I wish David would have took his own advice. And you know what? Sometimes I wish we would take our own advice. What are you watching right now? What are you watching on your iPad? What are you watching on your phone? David said, I won't let anything wicked come before me. I know what you're thinking right now. Well, I don't know what I would watch because everything I watch on TV, everything I listen to is wicked. But you got to get to the point in your life. When is the last time that you watched something on TV or you went to the movies and you walked out of? Ken, man, it's just because you're not strong, you're weak. I know. That's why I don't watch it. And you need some people in your life that will ask you some tough questions. Because if you were in my circle, these are the questions I would ask you. How you treating your wife? How you treating your husband? When is the last time you looked at porn? Have you watched anything immoral or unethical this week? Because if you don't have people asking you tough questions, you're a dangerous person. And that's why some of us don't want to get in a small group. Because if you get in a small group, you know someone might ask you these questions. So we social distance ourselves from our community instead of engaging and pressing in to be healed. The Bible says in James chapter 5, verse 16, if you confess your sins to one another, you will be healed. And the reason some of us have not been healed from sexual addictions or issues is because we haven't confessed our sin in front of other believers that will pick us up in our time of need. Matthew chapter 6 says this, the lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. He says, listen, Jesus says, if your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. But this is what he says. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. As the eye goes, your whole body goes. If your eye gate is watching good things, you will do good things. If your eye gate is watching bad things, you will do bad things. It doesn't start in the heart, it starts in the eye, which goes to the heart. And Joseph would not allow his sight. I know she was beautiful, but that's why he didn't look. That's why he didn't get caught up in it. And we got to get to the point where we say, you know what, I'm going to please God more than I please my flesh. Job 31:1 says this, I've made a covenant with my eyes. Wow. I made a covenant with my eyes not to look with lust at a young woman. Have you made a covenant with your eyes? I know this is difficult because there's times where I'm watching TV with my family and all of a sudden they'll have a commercial pop up. And it might be a half-dressed woman, or you go to the Pistons game because, you know, nothing's going on in the Pistons game, so you end up looking at the halftime show, and it's like, man, I got to look down. And it's not because I don't like it. I look down because I do like it. Oh, y'all missed it. Whoo! Job said, I made a covenant with my eyes that I won't look at a woman lustfully. Have you made a covenant with your eyes not to look at a woman or a man lustfully? Because a look begins the lust. And if we're going to conquer this test, this purity test, we have to be careful about what we see. And here's the next point, everybody. If we want to conquer the purity test, victory starts with a no. Victory starts with a no. Genesis chapter 39, verse 8. But Joseph refused. Look, he told her, my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. He refused. He didn't entertain it. He said, look, my master trusts me. Here's my question for you. Can your master trust you? Can God trust you with what you look at, with your conduct, with your purity? He says this, with everything in his entire household. Listen to me. You will never get to the destiny that God has for you if you don't master the purity test. However, if you do walk into your destiny will implode if you don't guard your eyes and guard your heart. And Joseph says this, he refused to be around her. R.A. Vernon says this, and I love this illustration. I'm going to give him credit this one time. He says, all men, ladies, I'm going to get you next time, all men are dogs. But there's a difference between a trained dog and a mutt. The trained dog and the mutt wants the same thing. However, the trained dog listens to what the master says. But a mutt goes after everything that it sees. Here's my question. Are you a mutt or are you a trained dog? Because the master will tell you to stay on the porch. Down, boy, don't go. Where the mutt will chase after anything. And we got to get to the moments in our lives where we listen to what the master says. And can the master trust you when it comes to your sexuality? Can the master trust you when you're scrolling through the phone? Can your master trust you when it comes to your virginity, your sexuality, or your addictions? Can he trust you? And if you ever want to walk into the destiny that God has for you, you have to pass this test. But this is a test that you'll never graduate from. This is a test that seeks after you to devour you, to damage your marriage, to damage your relationship, and ultimately your covenant with God. But victory starts with the no. Look at verse 9. No one here has more authority than I do. This is Joseph speaking. He has held back nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God. Listen to it. Listen to it. It would be a great sin against God. Listen to me. Some people are not having sex, are dealing with sexual immorality, not because it's a sin, it's because you don't want to get caught. How do I know that? I don't want to get caught. My mom might be coming home. My father might be coming home. Joseph said, listen to me. I'm not going to do it because I don't want to sin against God. My question to you is, when it comes to sexual immorality, when it comes to this purity test, do you say no because that's a sin against God? Because he cares more about his relationship with God than he cares about the relationship with others. Love is selfless, where lust is selfish. And if you're with someone who's pressuring you to do something that you know is antithetical to what God is telling you, then that's not love, that's lust. And he said it would be such a great sin against God. Joseph wasn't 157 years old. Joseph was in his prime. He was 17 years old, hormones out of whack. But he had a relationship with God. And my question is, maybe you're a teenager listening right now. Maybe you're a young adult, or maybe you're like me, getting close. Don't worry about all that. A millennial. When it comes to this test of purity, how well are you doing? Can I be honest with you today? I believe that if I was at my church right now, it'd be just as quiet as the church is right now because nobody's here. Because this is a test that's very uncomfortable, but this is a test that we need to address. How are you doing with the purity test? Are you doing as good as Joseph? Because Joseph did not entertain the thought. And if a man and a woman comes up to you outside of your marriage and tries to get you to sleep with them, or you're on your phone and you're scrolling, victory starts with a no. Look at verse 10. So she kept putting pressure on Joseph. Listen to me. If someone's coming after you, saying no one time won't help. You're going to have to keep saying no over and over, and you're going to have to leave the environment because that's what temptation comes. Over and over again. It says she kept putting pressure on Joseph day after day. What does temptation do? It comes after you day after day after day after day after day. And when you think that you've mastered it, it comes back to you. But he refused. Do you see Joseph? He didn't cave in. He never gave in. He said, but he refused to sleep with her, and he kept out of her way as much as possible. Now, he was working for Potiphar. He needed some money. So maybe you're at your job. When you go back to work, I want you to think about this. Take inventory of the people you've been around. I know she's fine, but you know exactly the time she goes on her break. And when she goes on her break to get some coffee, you're already there, and you know what type of coffee she likes. You need to stay away from her. Hey, you need to stay away from him. You know the car he drives, you know the cologne that he has. You need to stay away from him. I think this is an opportunity for us while we're in the house to really take inventory of what we're looking at, what our relationships are with people on our job. And I don't know, maybe for you it's even tougher, more difficult because you're in the house and your mind starts to wander. And then your phone starts to scroll. But we got to be like Joseph and refuse to cave in when it comes to temptation. And he said he kept out of her way as much as possible. And I hear people say all the time, Ken, how far can we go without it being sin? You get this a lot at youth groups, but I really believe a lot of adults say, so how far can we go without it be sin? You get close to the line and eventually you'll cross the line. Can we hug? Can we kiss? Can we spend the night? How far is it? We're not doing anything wrong. We're adults. We're going to get married anyway. What does a piece of paper have to do with it anyway? It has nothing to do with it, but your relationship with God and living a blessed life has a lot to do with it. Look at this from the Message translation. It says this in the next verse. It says that Proverbs chapter 6, verse 27, can you build a fire in your lap and not burn your pants? Can you build a fire in your lap and not burn your pants? I want you to think about that. It's saying this, don't get close enough where you get so close that eventually you will cross the line. Because if you get close to something, eventually you will go over the edge. I've met some people in churches who actually start prayer groups with the opposite sex. And I want you to know this, prayer builds intimacy. That's why in our church we have gender-specific groups. We also have co-ed groups, but when we deal with really intimate situations, we have gender-specific groups because when you get close to somebody, it breeds intimacy. And now we're at people's houses talking about when 2 or 3 gather, we're just going to hold hands. With this COVID-19, you can't hold hands anyway. And you don't know what to do. You guys are listening to Babyface and Teddy Riley and all these different artists together, and you're getting too close with one another. And then you end up making a mistake. And you might be thinking, man, but I like her, he likes me, and we're not going to cross the line. But can I ask you a question? This is what Dr. Phil says. How's that working out for you? Have you crossed the line? Does it bother you that you've crossed the line? Because when you're in those moments, listen to me. Pastor, can you pray for me? I'm going to pray that you run out of every situation that causes you to fall. Yes, I want you to read the Bible. Yes, I want you to pray. But in those moments is when we need to get out of Dodge like Joseph did. I don't know if you've been looking at this treasure chest right here, but this chest has a lot of trinkets inside of it. And what we typically do, what is in your chest right now? What is the area that you've stuffed away and you close the lid because you don't want people to know the issue that you have? Is it sexual immorality? Is it pornography? Is it a magazine? Is it what you're watching on Instagram? What is in your treasure chest that you don't want people to open? Well, today I want you to open that chest because I want to talk about it. Because God has a dream for you. He has a plan for you. But you will never walk into God's plan unless you deal with what's in the box. We all have something in the box. We all have something in the box that we want to close and not expose. But until you open up that box and you deal with that box, your destiny will remain closed. And I don't know about you, but if God deals with you in private and you don't respond, he'll end up dealing with you in public. I've seen so many pastors, I've seen so many Christians, I've seen so many people who don't even know Jesus, we're all the same, that their life has imploded because they haven't dealt with this test, sexual purity. And so what happens when temptation comes day after day after day? You need to pray, you need to pray, you need to pray. However, if you ever get caught in a situation, you need to do what Joseph did, because Potiphar's wife came to Joseph and demanded sex from Joseph. And he did not say, hey, your husband might catch us. He said, I will not sin against God. And she came back again. And you know what Joseph did? At that time, Joseph didn't pray. Joseph didn't grab his Bible. You need to do what Joseph did. Joseph grabbed some shoes and started running. I don't know about you, but I wish I had some people with some Nikes and then would start running when temptation comes your way. Run, Forrest, run. You need to run away from some situations that would cause you to fall. When you're in those moments, you have to get some track shoes. You need to run. How many people have lost their ministry, their family, because they didn't run? How many people have lost relationship with their children because they didn't run? How about you? Do you run? Or do you walk into some stuff you never thought you'd walk into? 1 Corinthians chapter 6, and I'm closing. It says, run from sexual sin. Run from sexual sin. No other sin. You see the distinction? No other sin. No other sin. Run from sexual sin. Paul makes a distinction. No other sin clearly affects the body as this one does. For sexual immorality is a sin against your own body. The Apostle Paul says this: if you're going to conquer this test, you need to run, because there's a difference between sinning and then sinning against your own body. Listen to me. If you're listening to me right now, I want you to run from sexual immorality and temptation and run to Jesus. That's what you have to do. You can't do this on your own. Your flesh is too weak. My flesh is too weak. You got to watch what you look at, but you also have to be willing to say no, even when your body is saying yes. God's given you a dream, but you will never walk into the manifestation of that dream if you don't conquer the purity test. And if you're here today and you're struggling with pornography, with sexual addictions, I don't care what it is, whatever your vice is, we want to help you. I want you to text this number on the screen. I want you to text RUN to 248-717-2032. What are we going to do? You're going to remain anonymous. We want to send you some information, some tools, some resources that will help you in your time of need. Some of you need some accountability. And there's certain apps that you can put on your phone and you can put on your computer that won't allow you to go to porn sites. If you text that number, you can set that up. Some of you need to just talk to somebody. And as a church, if you have an addiction, we will pay for a counseling session for you. There's also some books, some resources. If you text that number, and ladies, I'm talking to you right now too. Text RUN to 248-717-2032. But if you're here today and you don't know Jesus, I don't want you just to run away from sexual immorality. I want you to run towards Jesus. And if you want a relationship with Jesus Christ, the Bible says in Romans chapter 10, verse 9, that if we confess with our mouth and believe in our hearts that Jesus is raised from the dead, we will be saved. If that's you today and you want to confess out loud that you've sinned, that you've blown it, and you need help of a Savior, then I want to ask you to text this number on the screen. I want you to text faith to 248-717-2032. We just want to reach out and have a conversation and help you with the next steps. God has a destiny for you. Joseph gets a dream at 17, but he doesn't walk into his destiny until 30 years old. And Joseph had the pride test, and he failed that test. But then Joseph ends up in a pit, and he has the pit test. But God delivers him out the pit, and he has the promotion test. But now Joseph is faced with the purity test, and he passes the test with flying colors. The question is, will you and I pass this test with flying colors? Amen.